You think toxic beauty trends are a modern problem. In medieval Europe, women painted plague blisters onto their cheeks and called it divine. Behind every pale face was a woman slowly bleeding herself white. Behind every perfect brow, a strip of rotting rat fur glued to scarred skin. They painted fake plague sores to flaunt immunity. They poured poison in their eyes to seem desirable. They hosted lice, wore disease, swallowed lead, and called it elegance. This wasn't vanity. This was self-destruction as performance. This was holiness, measured by how close you could get to death without dying. In a world where pain was prestige and decay was sacred, the most beautiful women were often the ones already fading. And what they did to stay that way will stop you cold. Let's explore what beautiful really meant when survival was luxury. Medieval noblewomen literally painted bubonic plague sores on their faces and convinced themselves it was gorgeous. The bubonic plague, also known as the Black Death, was a bacterial infection that created painful, dark swellings called buboes under the skin. These grape-sized lumps appeared on necks, armpits, and groins, often turning black before victims died within days. Between 1347 and 1351, this disease wiped out roughly 60% of Europe's population, making it humanity's deadliest pandemic. But here's where it gets weird. Survivors bore distinctive dark scars where their buboes had been. Instead of hiding these reminders of humanity's worst nightmare, the upper classes decided they looked fashionable. The twisted logic was simple. If you survived the plague, you were clearly blessed by God and tougher than everyone else. Nothing screams, "I'm divinely protected," like voluntary disease cosplay. By the 14th century, Italian and French court ladies were using charcoal, burnt cork, and even actual tar to create convincing plague spot replicas. The Venetian merchant Giovanni da Prato wrote in 1367 about noblewomen who adorned themselves with the marks of death's kiss, believing it showed divine favor. They called them beauty patches, because apparently irony was invented centuries before we thought. The trend spread faster than the actual plague had. Spanish courtiers began importing special black wax from Morocco specifically for fake plague spots. Some women even hired artists to paint elaborate designs around their artificial blisters, turning pestilence into high art. Of course, they had no idea they were basically wearing death as an accessory. But when you're trying to show off your survival status in a world where most people didn't make it past 30, questionable fashion choices start making sense. Speaking of questionable choices, the lengths people went to for pale skin involved substances that would make a plague blister look like a minor inconvenience. Roman women were literally painting their faces with poison and calling it beauty. Lead-based makeup wasn't just popular, it was the Instagram filter of the ancient world, and about as healthy as eating glass. The Romans perfected a face powder called ceruse, made from white lead and vinegar. It gave skin that coveted ghostly pale complexion that screamed, "I'm too wealthy to work outdoors." Never mind that it was slowly melting their faces off from the inside out. Pliny the Elder documented the recipe in 77 AD, cheerfully noting that the best version came from Rhodes and could make any woman luminous as moonlight. But wait, it gets worse. To achieve that perfect pale-eyed look, women would drip lemon juice directly into their eyeballs. The citric acid would burn away the natural pigmentation, leaving behind a startling light-colored iris. Imagine voluntarily inflicting that kind of pain for beauty. The Roman poet Ovid actually wrote instructions for this procedure in his Art of Love, because apparently relationship advice and chemical burns went hand in hand. The lead makeup trend lasted over a millennium. Even Queen Elizabeth of I became a cautionary tale. She slathered ceruse on daily until her teeth turned black and her hair fell out. The lead literally rotted her alive from within, all in the name of beauty standards. Ironically, she then had to paint fake plague spots to cover the pockmarks left by her poisonous beauty routine. The strangest part? Everyone knew it was dangerous. Roman physicians wrote extensively about lead-poisoning symptoms, yet the fashion persisted. Beauty standards have always been a bit unhinged, but this was taking dedication to a whole new level. Of course, if you thought lead face paint was extreme, wait until you hear what having rotten teeth said about your social status. Black, crumbling teeth weren't a sign of poor hygiene in medieval Europe. They were literally a status symbol that proved you could afford sugar. The worse your teeth looked, the wealthier everyone assumed you were. Sugar arrived in Europe around the 11th century as an exotic luxury import from the Middle East, costing roughly the equivalent of $100 per pound in today's money. Only the ultra-wealthy could afford to rot their teeth with it, making dental decay the ultimate flex. Poor people had to settle for honey or fruit, which kept their teeth annoyingly healthy and white. By the 13th century, having black teeth became so fashionable that people who couldn't afford sugar started artificially blackening their teeth with soot, charcoal, or even paint. Japanese court ladies took this trend to an art form called ohaguro, painting their teeth jet black with a mixture of iron filings and vinegar. The darker your teeth, the more sophisticated you appeared. Queen Elizabeth I, yes, her again, was particularly proud of her rotted teeth, considering them proof of her refined palate and royal wealth. Spanish ambassadors wrote home describing her black teeth as a sign of her noble breeding. She would smile widely at court functions, showing off her decay like jewelry. The irony was delicious. While the poor maintained strong, white teeth from their simple diets, the rich were literally destroying their mouths to prove they could afford to do so. Medieval logic at its finest, turning self-destruction into a bragging right. But if you think voluntarily ruining your teeth was unhinged, the lengths women went to for dilated pupils would make dental destruction look sensible. Renaissance women were putting rat poison in their eyes every morning and calling it a beauty routine. The same deadly nightshade extract used to eliminate rats and mice was being dripped directly onto eyeballs for that perfect, sultry gaze. The plant contains atropine, a compound that dilates pupils by paralyzing the muscles that control them. In small doses, it created that dreamy, unfocused gaze that men apparently found irresistible. In slightly larger doses, it caused hallucinations, seizures, and death. Italian women were essentially playing Russian roulette with their eyeballs every morning. Venetian courtesans popularized the trend around 1450, believing enlarged pupils made them look more passionate and mysterious. The effect was dramatic. Pupils would expand to nearly cover the entire iris, creating an otherworldly, almost alien appearance. Men described these women as having eyes like dark pools of desire, completely unaware they were staring into the effects of systematic poisoning. The side effects were horrific but considered worth it. Women stumbled around half-blind in bright light, suffered constant headaches, and frequently hallucinated. Some went permanently blind after years of use. The physician Giovanni Marinello wrote in 1562 about treating noble women who saw demons in every shadow after their daily belladonna routine. What's truly insane is that everyone knew it was dangerous. The same herbalists selling belladonna for beauty also sold it as rat poison and assassination tools. Yet women continued the practice for centuries, choosing temporary attractiveness over functional vision. Medieval noblewomen's elaborate hairstyles weren't just crawling with lice. They were literally designed as luxury breeding grounds for parasites. Think influencers flexing designer handbags, except these women were showing off the bugs living in their hair as status symbols. The bigger and more complex your hairstyle, the more prestigious you were, which meant Women would go months without washing their hair to maintain these towering creations. They used sticky substances like animal fat, tree sap, and flour-based pastes to sculpt their locks into architectural marvels. These concoctions created perfect ecosystems for lice, fleas, and other tiny residents. French court ladies in the 15th century competed to see whose hair could harbor the most distinguished parasites. They believed that well-fed lice were a mark of good health and rich blood. Some even imported exotic lice species from other countries, treating them like living jewelry. The Duchess of Burgundy famously bragged about her Italian lice at court gatherings in 1467. The elaborate headdresses made the situation worse. These towering wire structures, covered in silk and jewels, could stay in place for weeks. Women would sleep sitting upright to preserve their hairstyles, while armies of creatures made themselves at home. Special ivory combs were designed not to remove lice, but to organize them into aesthetically pleasing patterns. What's truly revolting is that servants were hired specifically to maintain these infestations. Hair tenders would feed the lice sugar water and ensure they stayed healthy and visible. Some wealthy women even wore magnifying glasses at social events so guests could admire their thriving colonies up close. But if living with intentional infestations seems extreme, the medieval approach to achieving perfect skin involved creatures far more disturbing than tiny bugs. Medieval women were paying premium prices to have blood-sucking worms attack their faces nightly. They genuinely believed these parasites would give them Instagram-worthy skin. Except Instagram was 800 years away, and the worms were very real. The theory was beautifully simple and completely wrong. Leeches would suck out bad blood that caused blemishes, leaving behind pure, perfect skin. European physicians in the 12th century promoted facial leeching as the ultimate beauty treatment, claiming it would cure everything from acne to wrinkles. Women would lie still for hours with dozens of leeches attached to their faces, necks, and décolletage. French noblewomen made it into a social event. They'd host leeching parties, where groups of ladies would gather to have their faces covered in the creatures while gossiping and drinking wine. The Abbey of Saint-Denis recorded expenses in 1284 for beauty leeches, imported specifically for the Queen's complexion treatments. Apparently, regular medical leeches weren't fancy enough. The side effects were horrific. Constant leeching left women's faces covered in circular scars and bite marks. Many developed serious infections from the wounds, while others suffered from severe anemia due to regular blood loss. Some women became so pale from blood loss that they had to use rouge made from crushed beetles just to look alive. What's most disturbing is that physicians charged premium prices for this torture. A single facial leeching session could cost the equivalent of a servant's monthly wages. Women were literally paying fortunes to have their faces slowly drained of blood, all in pursuit of medieval beauty standards. The irony was perfect. While trying to achieve flawless skin, they were creating permanent scarring and turning themselves into walking corpses. But compared to what they put on their eyebrows, leeches were practically a spa treatment. Medieval women were gluing actual rodent fur to their faces to create the perfect eyebrow shape. Yes, you read that correctly. They were harvesting hair from dead rats and wearing it as facial accessories, convinced it made them look sophisticated. The trend started in 13th century France, when thin, high-arched eyebrows became the height of fashion. Women would pluck their natural eyebrows completely bald, then attach strips of mouse or rat fur using tree sap and beeswax adhesives. The finer the rodent fur, the more expensive and prestigious your eyebrows became. Some wealthy ladies even imported exotic rat species from Asia specifically for their superior fur quality. The process was revolting. Furriers who specialized in beauty pelts would skin freshly killed rats, cure the tiny hides, and cut them into eyebrow-shaped strips. These were then dyed various shades using crushed berries, soot, or even human hair powder. The result was a pair of perfectly arched, unnaturally fluffy eyebrows that moved independently when women talked or laughed. Venice became the epicenter of this trade. The city's records from 1387 show taxes collected on facial rodent pelts imported for cosmetic purposes. Wealthy Venetian women would commission custom eyebrow sets, with some owning dozens of different rat fur styles for various occasions. They treated these dead animal strips like jewelry collections. The hygiene situation was predictably nightmarish. The fur would absorb sweat, oils, and makeup, creating bacterial breeding grounds directly on women's faces. Many developed severe skin infections where the adhesive touched their skin. Some women's foreheads became permanently scarred from repeatedly ripping off and reapplying their rodent accessories. But if strapping dead rat fur to your face seems unhinged, the medieval method for achieving rosy cheeks involved deliberately weakening yourself to the point of near death. Medieval nobles were coating themselves in whale vomit and paying astronomical prices for the privilege. Ambergris, literally chunks of sperm whale digestive waste, was the most coveted perfume ingredient in Europe, more valuable than gold by weight. This waxy gray substance forms in whale intestines when they can't digest squid beaks and other sharp objects. The whale's body coats these irritants in a protective substance, which eventually gets expelled through vomiting or defecation. Basically, medieval perfume was made from whale stomach problems, and people fought wars over access to it. European merchants would scour beaches for these precious chunks of marine bile, often following flocks of seabirds that were attracted to the smell. A single piece of high-quality ambergris could fund an entire expedition. The substance was so valuable that laws were passed regulating its collection. In England, all ambergris found on beaches legally belonged to the crown. The irony was delicious. While everyone knew ambergris came from whale guts, they convinced themselves it smelled divine. Medieval perfumers mixed it with rose oil and spices, creating fragrances that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Noble ladies would dab this whale waste behind their ears, on their wrists, and even soak their clothes in it before important events. What made it even more ridiculous was the lengths people went to authenticate real ambergris. Professional whale vomit experts emerged, able to distinguish between genuine intestinal expulsions and cheaper substitutes. Fake ambergris became such a problem that guilds developed elaborate testing methods to verify the authenticity of their whale waste products. The most expensive ambergris came from sick whales. The sicker the whale, the better the perfume. Medieval logic strikes again. If it came from a suffering sea creature's digestive system, it must be luxurious. But even whale vomit perfume pales in comparison to the final beauty treatment we're about to explore. One so dangerous it could blind you permanently with a single drop. By now, you're probably wondering how any of these women survived long enough to reproduce, and honestly, many didn't. So, still think medieval beauty standards were totally unhinged? Between the plague spot painting, leech facials, and rodent eyebrow installations, these ladies turned self-destruction into high art. And yet, none of this was seen as crazy. It was sophisticated, aspirational, even holy. Today we have dermatologists in SPF 50. Back then, beauty meant bleeding yourself unconscious, hosting parasites as accessories, and hoping your whale vomit perfume didn't kill you first. History doesn't repeat, but vanity sure loves its echoes. At least medieval women knew their beauty routine was poison. We call ours wellness.